The next morning came too quickly. Jack woke early, the light of dawn creeping through the cracks in the wooden walls of his small home. He stretched his stiff arms and rubbed his tired eyes. The events of the previous evening felt like a strange dream, but the woman, Taya, was still here, and her request was as real as the hot Arizona sun rising in the distance. He had barely slept, his mind turning over the promise he had made. Helping her was a dangerous decision, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger than either of them was at work here. And so, after a quick breakfast of black coffee and hard bread, Jack began his day with a quiet resolve. Today, he would help Taya. Taya, however, was already awake and moving when Jack stepped outside. She was standing near the barn, staring at the horizon, her long black hair blowing in the morning breeze. She looked like she belonged to the desert itself, a part of the land, just as much a creature of the wild as the coyotes and rattlesnakes. When Jack approached, Taya turned to face him, her expression focused but calm. "I'm ready," she said. "We can start today." Jack nodded, though he wasn't sure exactly what starting meant. He had been many things in his life: cowboy, rancher, hunter, but a tracker? A rescuer. That wasn't something he had ever been. Still, he couldn't back out now. He had given his word. Taya led the way, her eyes scanning the desert around them as they walked. Her knowledge of the land was impressive. She didn't need a map or a compass. She knew the signs, the trails, the tracks left behind by men, animals, and even the wind. Jack had lived in this land for years, but he couldn't say he had the same skill. They traveled in silence for hours, walking through dry, cracked earth and over jagged hills, their only company the occasional breeze or the distant call of a hawk. Jack kept his thoughts to himself, his eyes always on the ground, looking for any signs that might lead them to her brother. Taya was unshaken by the harsh conditions of the desert. The heat didn't seem to bother her, nor did the thirst that made Jack's throat feel like sandpaper. She kept her focus ahead, occasionally stopping to examine the ground for footprints or signs of movement. Jack had to admit there was something remarkable about her strength, her determination. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving in this harsh land. They stopped for a break in the late afternoon, resting beneath the shade of a large rock. Jack took a long swig of water from his canteen and wiped his brow with the back of his hand. He watched Taya as she carefully inspected a set of tracks in the sand. "This is recent," she murmured, her fingers gently brushing the marks in the dirt. The group we're looking for, they're close. Jack felt a sense of urgency stir within him. They had to be getting close to finding her brother. But there was something else, something Jack couldn't quite put his finger on. Maybe it was the way Taya carried herself, or how she seemed to understand the land better than he ever could. But he found himself trusting her more and more, and that was a feeling he hadn't expected. Trust wasn't something he gave easily, but with Taya it felt almost natural. They continued their journey late into the evening. The desert, once a vast and empty place in Jack's eyes, now felt full of hidden paths and secrets, all waiting to be discovered. Taya's presence seemed to draw the desert to life, turning it from a barren wasteland to a place of mystery and adventure. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand, they came upon a small run-down shack. It was barely standing, the walls sagging and the roof half collapsed. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He knew this place. This was where the group of settlers he had heard rumors about often camped. They were dangerous men known for causing trouble and stirring up violence. Taya didn't hesitate. She moved forward, her steps quiet but determined. Jack followed her, keeping his distance, but his hand rested on the grip of his rifle. They had reached a point of no return. They had to be careful. As they got closer to the shack, they crouched down behind a pile of rocks. Jack peered around the corner and saw two men sitting by a fire talking in low voices. They were armed, rifles resting beside them, and they didn't look friendly. Taya's eyes flicked to Jack. Without a word, she signaled for him to stay back. Jack understood. She was going to make her move, and he had to trust her. Taya slowly moved to the side, keeping herself hidden from view, and then she disappeared into the shadows. Jack held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't help but admire her. She was like a ghost, moving through the desert as if she had always belonged there. Minutes passed. It felt like hours. Jack's mind raced with thoughts of what could happen next. He wasn't a man who had ever enjoyed fighting, but he knew how to defend himself. And if things went south, he was ready. Then he heard a shout. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to get Jack's attention. He stood up, rifle in hand, ready to move. But before he could react, Taya reappeared, her face grim. She held up a hand, signaling for him to remain quiet. She was holding something, no, someone by the arm, her brother. He was unconscious, dirty, and bruised, but he was alive. Jack could see the relief flood across Taya's face. And for the first time since he had met her, he saw a true smile. A smile that was full of hope and gratitude. "We have him," Taya said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Thank you." Jack didn't know what to say. His chest tightened with a strange mixture of pride and relief. He had done it. He had helped her. And in the process, he had found something he hadn't expected, a new sense of purpose, a new reason to keep going. But the job wasn't over yet. They still had to get out of the desert, and with the settlers not far behind, Jack knew they didn't have much time. "Let's get moving," he said, his voice steady. "We need to get you both to safety." They moved quickly but quietly. Jack kept an eye on the horizon, watching for any sign of danger. As the night deepened, they found a hidden cave to shelter in, and Jack stayed on guard while Taya tended to her brother. It wasn't the life Jack had imagined for himself, helping others, fighting for something bigger than survival. But as he watched Taya care for her brother, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long time, Jack realized he wasn't just a man living in the desert. He was part of something greater, something that could still be fixed, something that could still heal. He wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Jack McCall had not asked for a life full of pain, but it had found him anyway. A rough man with a hard life, he had settled into a remote ranch in the Arizona Territory, away from the noise and bustle of the nearby towns. His house stood on a piece of land he could call his own, and though it was barren and quiet, it was all he needed. He had no friends, no family, and no desire for either. A man who had loved deeply once, he now lived only for work. Years ago, Jack had been a different man. He had been a man with dreams, with a woman by his side, and with a future that looked bright. But all of that had changed when the woman he had loved, Sarah, had been taken from him. Sarah's death had been sudden and cruel, leaving Jack broken and bitter. Since then, he had sworn never to love again. Love, in his eyes, was nothing more than a cruel illusion that only brought pain. As the years passed, Jack's pain faded into the background, buried under layers of dust and silence. He spent his days mending fences, caring for his cattle, and fixing up his old barn. Each day was the same as the last, lonely, quiet, and predictable. He liked it that way. The less he had to interact with people, the better. The world had shown him its worst, and he wasn't about to open himself up to any more heartache. It was late one evening, as the sun began to set and painted the sky with shades of orange and purple, when everything changed. Jack had just finished a long day of work and was sitting on his porch sipping a cup of coffee. He stared out at the barren desert that stretched before him, his mind lost in the emptiness of the land. The soft wind blew across his face, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and dust. It was peaceful, but Jack couldn't help the ache in his heart. Sometimes he would look at the vast sky and wonder what it would be like to feel something again, to open his heart to the world and not expect it to turn cold. That's when he heard the footsteps. At first he thought it was a trick of the wind, but then the sound grew louder, closer. Someone was walking toward his house. Jack's hand tightened around the coffee cup and he stood up, his boots scraping against the wooden floorboards of the porch. He glanced around, half expecting a neighbor or a ranch hand to be coming by for a visit. But when he looked toward the edge of his porch, there was no one in sight. The footsteps continued, though, echoing in the quiet desert night. Jack's gaze sharpened and his instincts kicked in. Someone was out there. He stepped down from the porch and moved quietly across the dirt path leading to his front door. He didn't want to deal with any strangers, but the sound of footsteps made him curious. His fingers brushed the handle of his rifle as he approached, ready for whatever was coming. And then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. A woman. She was young, perhaps in her 20s, with long black hair that fell loosely around her shoulders. Her skin was dark from the sun, and she wore a simple dress made of cloth, clearly worn and tattered from days of travel. Her eyes, deep brown and intense, looked at Jack with a quiet urgency. She carried a small bag over her shoulder, and her bare feet kicked up dust as she moved closer. Jack froze for a moment. He didn't know who she was or why she was here, but something about her presence made him uneasy. His first instinct was to turn her away, to tell her to leave. His life was simple and solitary for a reason. The woman stopped just a few feet from him, standing tall despite the exhaustion that seemed to weigh on her. "Sir," she said softly, her voice steady but tired. "I need help." Jack said nothing at first. He studied her carefully, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Help?" he repeated. He could already guess what she was going to ask. They always did. People who wandered into his life never brought good news. The woman nodded, her gaze never wavering. "I've been searching for my brother," she explained, her words slow and deliberate. "He went missing after a raid by some men. I need to find him." Jack's heart tightened for a brief moment. He had heard of the raids. The violence that swept across the land between settlers and native tribes was nothing new. It was a brutal world, and people like him, people who preferred to stay away from the fighting, were often caught in the middle. "You've come to the wrong place," Jack said gruffly. "I don't get involved in other people's business." The woman's face remained calm, but there was something in her eyes, something desperate. "Please," she said, her voice soft but full of conviction. "I don't know where else to go. I've been traveling for days, and I need someone who knows this land, who knows how to survive out here." Jack looked away, his mind racing. He didn't want to help. He couldn't help. The last time he had tried to help someone, he had lost everything. And he wasn't about to make the same mistake again, but there was something about her that made him pause. Something in her voice, the way she held herself, the quiet strength in her eyes. She wasn't like the others who had passed through his life, asking for favors or trying to manipulate him. She seemed different, genuine, even though she was a stranger. Jack sighed, his shoulders heavy with the weight of a decision he didn't want to make. "Fine," he said, his voice low. "You can stay the night. But in the morning, you'll be on your way." The woman gave him a small nod of gratitude. "Thank you." Jack stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. As she passed him, he noticed how her eyes flicked around the small ranch. She seemed to take in every detail, from the weathered barn to the scattered cattle in the distance. She didn't speak, but he could feel the curiosity in her gaze. Once inside, Jack offered her a seat at the table, but she declined. She seemed too tired to sit still for long. Instead, she moved to the window, gazing out into the vast desert. The silence between them was thick, but Jack didn't mind. He wasn't a man of many words, and neither was she, it seemed. After a long while, Jack spoke again. "Where are you from?" he asked, his voice softer now. He didn't know why he cared to ask, but something about her presence made him want to understand her story. "I'm Apache," she replied simply. "My name is Taya." Jack nodded. He had heard of the Apache people, of course, but it wasn't often that someone from the tribe ventured this far into settler territory. It was a dangerous place for anyone from her people, and he couldn't help but wonder why she had risked so much to get here. "Why come all the way out here?" he asked, trying to push past his discomfort. "Why not stay with your people?" Taya's expression softened, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "My tribe is scattered. I'm looking for my brother. I believe he's been captured by a group of settlers. I can't trust anyone else to help me." Jack was quiet for a long time. He had his own reasons for wanting to stay out of conflicts, but he understood the pain in her eyes. He had lost someone he loved once too. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as cold as he had believed. Without saying another word, Jack poured her a drink and handed it to her. She took it with a quiet thanks, and they sat in silence, the weight of their shared loneliness filling the room. For the first time in years, Jack found himself wondering if perhaps he wasn't as alone as he thought. Perhaps there was more to this world than just survival, more than just living with the ghosts of the past. And for the first time in a long time, Jack McCall felt something stir within him. Something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years.